The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
The most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts. Tēnā koutou katoa, this is Toby Manhire from By Lunchtime. Hope your day is going swimmingly. In this, the latest of a series of reissues of By Lunchtime Politics podcast from the year 2021, we present Podathon. This was when we had the idea solely by ourselves of having a telethon-style vaccination event. It was when we were in lockdown, so we were doing a series of podcasts quite deep into the night with me, Annabelle, Ben, and Ti here staying very bravely into the small hours as we blathered away. It did sort of get a bit hysterical at points, but sometimes that's where the magic happens. In this podcast, we talk, of course, about the vaccine rollout, about the lockdown, and a little bit about MMP too.
Thank you very much for your kind donation. Thank you very much, thank you very, very, very much. Thank you very
Kia ora, New Zealand. Hello and welcome to Podathon 2021, coming live from Avalon Studios, Lower Hutt. It's gone by lunchtime, but not until tomorrow lunchtime. Over the course of the next 24 hours on the Spin-off Podcast Network, we'll be bringing you a feast of laughs, socially distanced conga lines and laughs, all in the cause of punching the novel coronavirus SARS-CoV-2, aka COVID-19, in its stupid face. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Annabelle Lee Mather, Ben Thomas, and the bad boys of Brexit, rolling around our great nation from Invercargill to Kaitaia, flying through the boundary checks with falsified papers in a piss-filled Zorb, vaccinating everything that moves. Jav you very much for your vaccination. Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, T.I. here, for agreeing to produce this 24-hour-long podcast. Really appreciate that. We are willing to do an edited version and publish that on our pod stream if everyone agrees to get vaccinated. Are you ready for the 24-hour pod, Annabelle?
I was born ready. I've been waiting for this moment my whole life. Well, technically since about 1987, which was the area of our last telethon.
You were very excited about doing this the Podathon that they've announced. You presumably are involved in producing that, are you, as leading executive producer of New Zealand Television?
I haven't been formally asked, but tonight I'm publicly offering my services if they're required. Ben, have you got the Zorb in the garage? Are you ready to go?
You've caught me in hour about 8, Toby.
Yes.
As soon as the Prime Minister announced her plans for a vaxathon on Saturday, the nation reacted as you would expect. Stuart Nash ripped off his shirt and started doing press-ups.
Yes.
And said it is never too early to fight the novel coronavirus.
He's on his 35th dose.
and I went and got the podcasting gear because we are going to beat this thing together.
It's pretty cool. Who doesn't love a telethon? Honestly, there are possibly some younger listeners, but it was a pretty grim time to be growing up, and the telethon every so often just brought a ray of light, and some soap star from Manchester
It was a joy, wasn't it, Bells?
It was an absolute joy. What our listeners won't be able to see is that we actually have David Seymour manning the telephones here. You'll be sent a special code and you'll be able to talk directly to him and pledge your vaccination.
And just like the telethons of old, there's all your favourite New Zealand stars here, Toby Manhire, Annabelle Lee Mather, but we also managed to secure 35 MIQ spots ahead of desperate New Zealanders trying to return to their home country for a few entertainment hosts from overseas who will hopefully be joining us in our antics once they're out of MIQ.
It's very exciting. It's very exciting. And look, it is exciting, right? Like it's a good idea. They're calling it Super Saturday, which is what they often call big sports days on paid television networks. But I don't care. I like it. They're calling it the Vaxathon, which a lot of people think they stole their idea because a lot of people had quite a good idea at the same time. And I love it. It's great. It is also feels quite well timed, not just Annabelle, because clearly vaccination of as many people as possible is our number 1, 2, 3 way out of this COVID hell that we and all the rest of the world are in, but also because last week felt like a bit of I don't know if it was a nadir, but it was a kind of a drop in the quality performance of the government overall, in my view. Did you feel that way? Did you feel like last Monday was a bit of a clanger?
Last Monday was pretty funky, and me and my daughter have got in the habit of watching the 4:00 presser, and then having discussions about it afterwards. And like me, she came away from it really confused and couldn't quite understand if it was a whole new level system or whatever it was. I think the issue is that obviously the week prior, the government had its feet held to the fire by John Key and various other people with big platforms, and I think they felt under pressure to provide a plan. And so on Monday they delivered kind of a mishmash of plans all in one, but it wasn't well communicated and it was confusing, and I think it left people feeling less clear about what the pathway was and whether or not we were still in elimination or if we were in suppression or whatever. So it wasn't a great week, and then as we saw it, it just got worse from there.
It was the roadmap, as it was trailed, was a kind of new variation on level 3 that applied to Auckland only, not to the Waikato, which at that time was already in a temporary level 3. But it was a loosened level 3. There were 3 steps. This was step 1, and it was picnics with your friends and a few other loosenings on a kind, as if to try and offer a little bit of brightness, because we're not, in fact, ladies and gentlemen, Avalon. I regret to inform you, we're in our homes in Tamaki Makaurau on day 50 whatever, and we're not going to moan about that because people get sick of it. But there was definitely a sense, wasn't there, Ben, that people were struggling. It kind of does get to you a bit, and I speak from someone who's got it pretty good as far as most things go, and it's getting to me a bit. So this was an opportunity to kind of offer a few more freedoms, while also acknowledging, I suppose, that some of the problem was among marginalised groups for whom the alert levels probably don't matter as much. But when it was played out, that roadmap, 3-step, level 3 stuff, people just, not everyone, some people have reprimanded me for a column I wrote this week in which I suggested it was confusing, but a lot of us were just a bit confused, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I think that with the exception of Toiletgate, which was uncovered by the crack investigators at the spin-off,
No pun intended.
I don't know that there was actually that much confusion about the rules as they were introduced. They were relatively straightforward. I think everyone in the same way that, level 3 includes widening your bubble, but not too wide for caregivers, for vulnerable people. People sort of intuitively get that. And I don't think that that's actually a cause of sort of, mass panic or sort of disorientation. The confusion, I think, came with that question of, is this still elimination? Are we still the greatest little COVID-beating country in the world? It's incredible how ingrained that became as a sort of part of New Zealand identity over the last 18 months. The government has made it pretty clear now that they don't think that getting back to 0 cases is readily achievable.
In Auckland.
In Auckland,
yeah.
But that means in the country, right? Auckland is still part of New Zealand until we reach level 3.4 Roman numerals 2, at which point we're
federated
ceded
states
to Australia.
The federated states of New Zealand, yeah.
Where the elimination strategy still holds, and they just eliminate Auckland. They just build a wall around it and leave it. But, But the Prime Minister certainly wasn't forthcoming last week in terms of, what is perhaps a semantic question, are we still going for elimination? Is that still the strategy? And it seemed, because, as you said, it didn't seem like this was the path out of elimination. Out of, having COVID in the community to loosen restrictions at all. What's more likely to have that happened was that they decided that actually it was very unlikely they were going to get back to 0 cases even at level 4, which failed to stamp it out in 4 weeks this time, or 5 weeks, just as it did, which it did last time. And so instead it was this kind of, the Prime Minister sort of proceeded in the most New Zealand way possible to kind of slowly break up with elimination by sort of ignoring it, talking. No, we're absolutely still going out. I've just been really busy. And then, over a few weeks, after relationship level 3, stage 2, she sort of says, well, let's not attach labels to these things. And so I think the PM has sort of done a very Kiwi male breakup.
Annabelle, she did kind of clarify it, I think, this Monday when it was pretty well explained that we're now on suppression in Tamaki Makaurau and elimination for the rest of the parts of the country, which explains, for example, why Waikato and Northland, or the part of Waikato that's affected in Northland, are in a stricter level 3 than those of us who live in Auckland are, right?
Yeah, but even that is kind of confusing though, right? Because we had one Delta case in Auckland and we immediately went into level 4, and now we know that those cases are also Delta, but they're remaining at level 3. I think, obviously the social license for level 3 and 4 is starting to wear thin, but I think the danger of what we have now is that the more room you give people to move and interpret what the rules are, get the whole give an inch, take a mile kind of approach to life that most New Zealanders have. And it's definitely, if I was to take a scientific approach and refer to the anecdata that I've just seen around my neighbourhood over the last week, you definitely see less people wearing masks, more people kind of gathering in the street for chats. And with the benefit of hindsight, I do wonder if we did come out of level 4 perhaps a week early.
When you look at the old curve, right, like just the case numbers, and they don't always correspond, they will never perfectly correspond to the changes in alert levels, but you look at when alert level 4 stopped and we moved to alert level 3, which I think, I can't remember what the date was, but the numbers very quickly after that start to go up again. And of course, they're privy to information that we didn't have about the nature of the cases and the particularity of the exposure events that were created. But it does seem, doesn't it, Ben, as if the move to level 3 correlated, at the very least, with an increase in those numbers?
Yeah, look, as an epidemiologist, I'd confirm that, yeah.
Epidemiolathon.
That's right. You can only conclude that they made the decision. You know, some people have said, the Prime Minister was being politically expedient. She was trying to throw a bone to people. This was all just political opportunism at its worst. And that's why we moved down to the crowd-pleasing level 3 with its KFC and its some childcare arrangements, rather than staying in level 4 and really just, knocking the dastardly virus out. That's not plausible. You know, if the government was acting rationally, which in matters of polling personal popularity they almost always are, there's no comparison between the sort of situation we are in now, which is facing further restrictions of some kind, possibly pretty strong, in the biggest city in the country, for months more. Compared to, a couple more weeks of everyone cooped up and then we go back to normal and enjoy a Kiwi summer. No government is that short-sighted that they would do that. So, you have to assume that they made the call, and it's a political call as much as anything else, that actually they weren't going to be able to get down to 0 cases. And as you say, or allude to, because apparently everyone in the media needs to sort of talk around this, it's because the people who were, we basically know the people who spread to the Waikato were people who were, gang-linked or at least organised crime-linked. And
which part of the Waikato are we talking about? Are we talking about the Kiowa one or the Raglan one?
Not Kiowa. That was the prisoner who was released.
As the Raglan one, do we know that the Raglan one is gang-related?
I don't know that for sure. Look, clearly there have been cases that are linked to gangs. No one would dispute that. But there are also, as best I can tell, a whole lot of cases that are linked to people who are in transitional housing or emergency housing, which is a very different thing. And obviously problems are presented by all of them when you go about contact tracing. Problems are particularly presented in the case that we had in Northland, or at least the companion in Northland, who basically went into hiding. It's difficult one, isn't it? Because you say people are tippy-toeing around it, Ben, but I think also there is a real danger of just sort of generalising and saying that all of the cases that occur in these parts of the world that aren't necessarily having a light shone on them all the time are criminal underworld, because I just don't think they are. I think there are people often who are literally homeless. But whatever it is, it's places that contact tracers and normal public health efforts can't reach.
I'd also disagree that we're tippy-toeing around it, because it seems like we've taken a sledgehammer approach to the gangs when there's actually not a whole lot of evidence that they're out there purposely spreading COVID through the community.
Yeah, it is interesting that we stopped naming clusters a while ago. And part of this is because, you need buy-in from every community that you're trying to get vaccinated, because that has to be the number one focus right now, and trying to get cooperation with contact tracing. Which, as we've seen, particularly, with the Northland case being the sort of example of that is not always easy. But you have to assume that the powers that be decided that there was no way, short of repressive militaristic tactics, that they could actually stop the spread under even level 4.
Yeah, and of course, we can speculate all we like, but what we know is that it's the greatest villain, the greatest organised crime syndicate of all time is Delta, and that with a reproduction rate of 6, and what we've seen around the world, that was really the overwhelming factor in all of that, wasn't it? That even when you were getting vaccination rates up, Delta's just laughing in your face. And I mean, now we're in this position where, as we're all celebrating together with our arms linked, canning towards Saturday's telethon, podathon, vaxathon, that's where the focus has to be, right? It was one of the factors in all of this, Annabelle, is the levels of vaccination among tangata whenua. And there was a question that Mark Dalder asked in a press conference of Chris Hipkins, and it was asked again of Willie Jackson on Q&A. And it's an interesting one, which was, if the overall rate across the country of vaccination was the same as the rate of vaccination for Māori, would you have moved from level 4 to level 3? And of course, the politicians, you can't really answer that, right? But what it does is it encapsulates, it illuminates just what an issue we have here with the inequity of the, on your program, the Hui, you had last night. I should say we're talking on the evening of Tuesday the 12th of October, is it? A piece from Tairāwhiti about the vaccination efforts there. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what it tells us about those vaccination drives?
It's basically the Māori health providers of the East Coast have set a 100% vaccination target for their people, and looking to the past influenza pandemic of 1918 to sort of provide motivation and guidance about how to respond. One of the interesting comments that were made during that interview, and I think it probably translates to Māori communities, particularly rural ones all over Aotearoa, is that the working through the prioritised groups doesn't work for their region, because if you're having to drive a couple of hours or even half an hour to go get vaccinated in a community where there may not be lots of petrol money and resource and time to be able to do that, working through a household generation at a time doesn't make sense. So they threw that out the window, and what they decided to do was to vax whānau en masse, so that when they're driving to come and get their vaccination, you can do a whole household at a time, because that way you've got a much better pick-up rate and spread, and you're doing it far more efficiently, and you're able to, capture a whole community at once. And I think, in terms of that kind of golden era that we had post the first outbreak and prior to this one, that was the sort of strategy, I think, that would have been really helpful for targeting Māori communities and getting us on par with what's happening with the rest of New Zealand. Now we're in catch-up mode.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
This is Climate Adaptation.
We are the pōtiki of the taiao.
And the words of those keeping the home fires burning.
It's more than just going along and planting some trees. You got to be able to defend that place to the end of your life.
We have the solutions. We just need to come back to the belief in ourselves as rangatira.
Join me, Nadine Hura, and Ruia Āpirehama, the Kōpapa Korangi Series 2, Ahi Ka. Brought to you by Te Komato Te Tonga, the Deep South Challenge, out now on the Spin-Off Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
One of the interesting things that came out, I think it was on Friday of last week, was that maps were released with what are called the SA2, very kind of granular mesh blocks, they used to be called, I think, of parts of the country and their vaccination levels. And one of the Hakanwal Singh, who does data stuff on the Spin-Off quite brilliantly, wrote in a piece that we published, I think yesterday or today, who knows when one day ends and another begins, about how the perils of ranking all those areas. And one of the reasons that that's unreliable, to put it mildly, is because you look at somewhere like Kaipara, and where the mayor was tweeting about this yesterday, and there's like 4 vaccination sites a zillion miles away from each other. And it, I don't love being in level 3, but when it comes for me next week to get my second dose, it's a piece of piss to get it done. I don't have to think about going for a putting aside an afternoon to go away and get it done and all that sort of thing. The other thing, Ben, is Ardern was criticised for disappearing a bit from Parliament last week, but she instead made a decision to go out on a kind of a vaccination tour, really, of the central and eastern part of the North Island. And maybe that's where the focus needs to be, rather than with the press gallery, rather than with boring people like us, but actually just basically getting everybody out, turning up, making hot dogs, handing out lollipops and stickers.
Yeah, I mean, she'll have to do a lot of vaxes. She'll have to be busy.
Clark was there too. Clark was there with
you could double it up. But
25 fishing rods with needles at the end.
Yeah, look, I think it was. I don't buy the criticism of her sort of being MIA. I mean, if we can produce an award-winning podcast like this remotely, I know that the PM can do things remotely as well. She's not always in the Beehive office. I think that was great. I think there's a lot of great initiatives now. We've seen mobile clinics with, Dr. Shane, the deputy leader of National, as per that was on the Hui as well, right? Is literally, jabbing people. And there are so many great initiatives now. But the thing, it really, maybe it's pointless to talk about, but it comes back to what Annabelle was saying, which is it's just playing catch up. We see the Prime Minister at the podium saying, I'm urging people to get vaccinated. I'm urging them. Well, where was the urgency before the Delta outbreak? Why did it take till, week 6 or 7 of the outbreak before there were mobile clinics? It boggles the mind that, for months leading up to this, not even leading up to this, but just in the months where we were COVID-free, the most that most people got was, some 4-page leaflet saying, that literally said, we can take our time getting the vaccination. Nicola Willis put up a screenshot, of that page in it. And there was, it makes you despair to think about it. But the fact that there was, and this is, policy analysts down in Wellington, whether at DPMC, Ministry of Health, wherever, they don't even know that most of these communities exist. That's not there. When there was an outbreak in Mount Roskill last year in August, Wellington called that the West Auckland outbreak. There are very real limits to what you can plan from in Wellington. And power and authority and resources and strategy should have been devolved much, much faster, to iwi, to PHO Māori healthcare providers, to GPs, to, and it's great that a lot of that's happening now. It's not happening fast enough. Resources, I don't think, are being freed fast enough. There was a great piece on RNZ, I think Sam Ollie wrote it, of a meeting that Penny Henare had up north with healthcare providers. And they said, they're still having to basically do sort of standard government procurement work, and accountability and reporting, just to get the resources to get a mobile clinic up and running. The wage subsidy was $11 billion handed out in 1 week on trust.
Yeah.
It just drives me crazy.
There were definitely things that weren't done as far as vaccination program was concerned, there were definitely groups that argue, I think, compellingly, including iwi hapu groups, that they weren't basically trusted to set up their own operations. Having said that, when you look at, for example, Australia and the vaccination rates there's a pretty close correlation between high vaccination and places where Delta's got out and low vaccination where they're still pursuing elimination. So while I don't doubt that they should have and could have done better, the big spikes in vaccination here have occurred in periods when it's like, holy shit, that virus is out and about. So there seems to me there's some extent to which that's always going to be the most present and compelling urgency for people to get vaccinated. But beyond that, when you look, for example, at the testing stuff, and we had the report on testing that was unveiled by David Murdoch a few days ago, which came over a year after the Roche-Simpson report was presented to Chris Hipkins and to the government. And you still feel as though there's just so much foot dragging on both saliva testing as a complement to nasopharyngeal, but also the rapid antigen testing, which, despite being less precise, as a complementary technology for example, truck drivers who are going down to Palmerston North or whatever. And then on top of that, the MIQ effort, you do begin to wonder whether or not, I mean, this is sort of the point I tried to make in the piece, that it's not just a comms effort, but it feels like the whole all of government, it was a bit like what do you call it? What do they call it in the comic book? The Justice League? You know about these things, don't you, Ben? That it's really the very best people were on the case in those weeks following the outbreak 18 months ago. They were all in like the Vodafone building or somewhere near Lambton Quay, and they were all just, I don't know, it just feels, it's so easy to criticize without being in the middle of it. I know there are all sorts of complicated problems, but it just didn't feel as though we were ready. And it felt to me like that Monday press conference last week epitomized us just not being ready.
I mean, part of it is that this is much more complex than last year. Last year...
Sure, yeah.
Last year, there was one tool that was lockdown. You physically distance. The laws of physics mean that with its R value, the virus, can't spread, can't live. This is much harder. But it almost seemed as if what we saw last week was, in the 18 months where we've been sort of sitting back and kind of mocking the UK's confusing sort of changes about you can meet one other person from one other family but no other members of their household in a park. You can have 3 friends over in your backyard, one use the toilet at a time, that kind of thing. And Australia with their rules about hairdressers versus personal trainers versus whatever. And we basically lived that whole life in a week. It was both. It was kind of. It was almost sort of like Dorian Gray, just kind of like all of our COVID years kind of accumulated on us in that instant. And maybe that's unavoidable. Maybe every society that goes through Delta has to go through those teething problems because, the alert level system did have the virtue of simplicity. We shouldn't pretend, though, that it never changed. I think pretty much every time we were in level 2 or 3, it was different from the last time.
Yeah, sure.
But it did give a very handy conceptual framework, which obviously you had a beautiful image in your critical piece this week where you said, you go down a level by going up 3 steps like an MC Escher drawing.
Can I just say for the record that I would have a hairdresser over a personal trainer any day. So if we get to pick, I'm going for a hairdresser.
What about if you have to be with 10 other people while doing cross-training and getting your haircut at the same time?
Fortunately for me, that will never, ever, ever, ever be an issue because I would never, ever, ever do cross-training.
But what if that was a condition, even if that was a condition?
then I'd just go to the supermarket and buy a bottle of Nice and Easy and do my own hair.
Okay.
That was that. I sort of saw that because, I think that was one rule that seemed to change over a course of hours, was the 10 people for an organised recreational activity. And I sort of thought, so could I get 9 friends at a park if I sold tickets?
Yeah. And that's exactly right. And then it does get, for example, I read today, which I hadn't realised, I read that one of the rules is that you can't meet up with a colleague and have a cup of tea and a biscuit socially distanced in a park and have a discussion about the work you're collaborating on. I don't know whether that would prohibit us from having a conversation. Obviously we're friends. This isn't work, but you know what I mean? It's one of those things. It's as soon as you start, as you say, Ben, you start getting into that territory where Boris Johnson seemed to be changing his mind halfway through a sentence about what a rule would be. I would say on that
I'm still confused about what an outdoor toilet is. Does that mean an outhouse, or does that just literally just mean a hole in the ground? Or something?
I think it means a lemon tree. Yeah. The one thing I would say just about when we talk about those other examples, the Britons and everywhere else, is I would not for a second swap, lots of places are opening up and you see people going to rock concerts, to stadiums, and you understand a bit of schadenfreude as they look at us, given there were elements of, as John Key put it, smugness, the whole 660 effect and all that. Not blaming 660, love 660, we're having a concert with 660 stuff. But we had this absolutely paradisical period, and we did get time. Maybe that leaflet that sounded like it wasn't very cool to say we don't have to hurry vaccination because we have the luxury of being COVID free. But we were COVID free for so long, and we still have had not very many people die, and we still have relatively more options, and we still have been in a relatively short lockdown, to the extent that if you dare tell someone who's been living in London or Melbourne that, oh God, we're getting towards day 50 of lockdown, I'm just going to get some KFC, they do not want to hear it. You know what I mean? It's months and months and months there. So I don't know. Did you, Annabelle, watch the 4 p.m. Monday yesterday with your daughter? And what was the verdict on that?
Yeah, she felt like it was clearer, as did I. Mm-hmm. I can't remember what else happened in it now. What else did they talk about in that 4 o'clock? The mandatory
vaccination and health workers.
Yeah, interestingly, I saw a post on Facebook tonight of a friend of mine who's in a wheelchair who's really freaking out about it because a couple of her carers aren't vaccinated, and from the sounds of it, aren't planning to be. And it's already a really stretched workforce. And as she said, obviously she would love to have vaccinated carers, and particularly because she is so vulnerable to COVID herself. But she would rather have carers and be able to eat and go to the toilet and those very basic things we take for granted than to not have anyone at all. And also a lot of kōrero about the teachers and how the, qualified reo Māori teachers are already quite hard to find in Rūmaki reo and kura kaupapa. So lots of kōrero about that. But I do imagine that it will encourage quite a few people to go and get vaccinated if they weren't. And I think overall the sentiment from parents is that they want to protect their tamariki. And their tamariki come first, so interesting times.
Yeah, I personally was relieved that there seemed to be, what's the term? They didn't gild the lily too much. They just went for it was kind of, this is the rule, we need you to do it. The teachers aren't until the 1st of January, health workers 1st of December. But you can't argue, Ben, that it's anything but unambiguous, right? This is what you need to do if you want to carry on in those jobs.
Yeah, absolutely, and wide coverage as well. Not a lot of loopholes or ways out of it. And I think this is one of the probably credit to the teachers unions, the various ones, for supporting on that. They probably did each other a favour there, the minister and the unions. And look, this is where you'll see, you might see opposition from some very hardcore, committed ideological anti-vaxxers, but the experience in the States is that the mandates work, that most people, whatever their sort of personal ambivalence, most people are more willing to get a jab that doesn't actually do anything except, except save you from a potentially fatal disease. Yeah. That's all you have to give up. Then lose their jobs. And I'm glad that they acted reasonably fast on it.
And you just hope that the combination of all these things, whether it's mandates, whether it's improving accessibility, whether it is fluffy campaigns, whether it's this very podcast, this Podathon now running into its 23rd hour. Hopefully TIA has cut out some bits, but this could be it. This could be what tips that one or two or three people into going to get their second jab. So thank you for that, Annabelle. I appreciate it.
No worries.
Do we want to talk about MMP before we go? It's 25th birthday today of MMP. How's it going? Do you think it works? Good scheme?
Isn't it great? On the 25th birthday of MMP, we've learned that Maureen Pugh has been hit by lightning 3 times, but successfully returned on the party list just as many times.
And vaccinated by Pfizer once, so well done, Maureen. Well done, Maureen. Go, Maureen. Yeah.
Were it not for MMP, we wouldn't have been blessed with Winston Peters as our Deputy Prime Minister so many times.
That's right.
How sad would that be?
Not many people know, actually, that MMP stands for Maureen Pugh.
In all seriousness about MMP, when you look at some of the most influential Māori politicians that we've had over the last 25 years, they wouldn't have been there were it not for MMP. The Matedias, the Peter Sharples, the rise of the Māori Party, Mana Party, all of those things. So, I think in that regard, it's a great voting system. One of my criticisms of it would be that I think with MMP, people tend to overthink their vote, and rather than voting for the people they want, they try and vote strategically to block other people from coming in. And so the parliaments that we end up with aren't necessarily a reflection of what people actually want, but rather what they fear the most. And so in that regard, I do wonder if STV would have been a better system, because at least then you can choose who you like the best, who you like not so much, right down to whose guts you hate.
It's interesting, isn't it, that one of the main criticisms levelled in advance of the mixed member proportional system was that it might lead to instability, and that but it hasn't really done that, has it? If anything, I'm not saying this is necessarily the antithesis of stability, but if anything, Ben, it's probably inclined itself towards incrementalism rather than kind of the big bold sweeps of some of the governments we saw under FPP.
Well, and that was why the public voted for it, because after you had the Longy Douglas government in the 80s, and then the Bolger government in the 90s, but both of which were elected and immediately tore up their manifestos and their promises, which saw them elected, and pursued completely different agendas. Now, I would argue that in both cases, the agendas were probably the right ones and probably necessary and probably forced on them by various exogenous factors. But at the same time, you can see why the public would get a little tired of that. And so MMP was seen as a way of diluting what Geoffrey Palmer called the unbridled power of governments in New Zealand, and it's worked very well with that. You know, some people say too well, you know, that there has been a kind of policy stasis and very slow-moving and sort of superficial tweaks to the underlying system. And you'll find the sort of people on the left who talk about, you know, the hold of dread neoliberalism over New Zealand talking about that. You'll find people who want more fervent, you know, reforms to the right talking about that as well. But it's the sort of thing that the public seems, you know, relatively happy with. The other criticism that's made is that because of that, it's particularly unsuited for dealing with those really big issues that do require, you know, that may require, you know, pretty seismic change. You know, climate change is one that gets brought up a lot. And, you know, time will tell.
Interesting. Time will tell. Nice to hear you. Little shout out to your talisman, Geoffrey Palmer there. Appreciate that. They're doing a little electoral system review now for some reason, choosing now. And one of the things that's included is that the old favourite, the old chestnut, should we extend to a 4-year term? Annabelle, do you think we should have a 4-year term, putting you on the spot? Maybe a 3.5-year term? 3 years, 9 months, something like that?
3 3/4. Yeah, I support the idea of a 4-year term. I think that a 3-year term is too short. You've particularly if you're a new government coming in, and particularly if you're this Labour government. Sorry, guys, not to be mean, but you know it's hard to really get runs on the board within 3 years.
Ben Thomas, 4-year term.
Yeah. I mean, the default position in New Zealand tends to be that we give governments a second term. Some people say that, you know, if you reduced it to a 4-year term, or if you extended it to a 4-year term, rather, you might see more one-term governments. So the default would go down from 6 years to 4. I'm not too sure about that, and I think, you know, 8 years is probably a bit too long as a kind of default. But also, you know, it doesn't actually take 3 years, 4 years or 3 years or even 2 years to make most of the changes that governments want to. You know, you would find that the same political pressures in terms of public acceptance, in terms of slavery to the polls, would be just as prevalent, you know, in a 4-year term.
And we don't have an upper house, you know. We know there's no check on the executive like an election, is there? So as long as that's the case and people have voted, how many times have we voted in referendums against a 4-year term? I forget. No, I don't think we'll do it. I think we're good. We're agreed. We'll stick with 3-year terms. I think that was the official God by Lunchtime Podathon verdict. Anything you would like to add before we check the final boards, cross to the Palmerston North studio to see what they're getting up to? Oh, look at that. As we sign out from here at Avalon, anything to add, Annabelle?
Kia hau maru te noho.
Ben?
Look, I think we're going to have to cut the feed. Stuart Nash's heart stopped beating a minute and a half ago. In efforts to revive him, the defibrillator voltage somehow leaped to Maureen Pugh. And we've just got a situation over here. Just run a commercial, please. Get us out of here.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spinoff. You can help us keep all of The Spinoff's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spinoff. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spinoff member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spinoff Podcast Network.